December 8, 1941, Silliman University, Dumaguete, Negros Island, Philippines. Professor Henry Roy Bell, a Presbyterian missionary who had spent 2 decades teaching physics to Filipino students, stared at the smoke rising from Manila Bay, 350 miles to the northwest. He was holding a letter from his daughter, written just that morning, asking when they would return to Kansas for Christmas. The answer, though he didn't know it yet, was never. Within 3 years, this soft-spoken physics professor, a man who had never fired a weapon in anger, who spent his days explaining thermodynamics and his evenings leading prayer meetings, would become Major Roy Bell. The Japanese would place a bounty on his head worth 25,000 pesos. His students would become his soldiers. And his classroom would transform into a guerrilla army command post that would help liberate an entire island. The Imperial Japanese Army, when they finally learned who was coordinating the resistance attacks that had killed over 200 of their soldiers on Negros, refused to believe the intelligence reports. A Presbyterian missionary, a physics professor, a man of God who had taught their own children before the war. They had expected Filipino army officers. They had expected American military commanders escaped from Bataan. They had expected hardened soldiers with combat experience. They had never expected a priest to lead a guerrilla army. This is the story of how the Japanese learned, too late, that faith, when combined with physics, engineering knowledge, and 20 years of trust built one relationship at a time in a community, creates something far more dangerous than any military academy could produce. By the time they understood what they were facing, Professor Bell had already helped turn Negros into a fortress they could never fully control. And the most terrifying part for the Japanese wasn't just that he was winning. It was that his army was growing faster than they could kill it. The fall of the Philippines unfolded with a speed that shocked even the Japanese planners. December 8, 1941, 10 hours after Pearl Harbor. Japanese bombers destroyed half of MacArthur's Air Force on the ground at Clark Field. 18 B-17 bombers, 53 P-40 fighters, obliterated before they could take off. American air superiority in the Pacific evaporated in 90 minutes. Within weeks, the American and Filipino defenders were retreating into the Bataan Peninsula, starving, diseased, outgunned, outnumbered. General Douglas MacArthur evacuated to Australia on March 11, 1942, leaving behind 76,000 troops with a promise: "I shall return." On April 9, 1942, the largest surrender in American military history occurred at Bataan. The Bataan Death March followed. 7,000 to 10,000 men died during the forced march to prisoner of war camps. By May 6th, Corregidor Fortress fell. The Philippines belonged to Japan. On Negros, 350 miles south of Manila, Roy Bell watched his world collapse in slow motion. The Japanese controlled the seas. American submarines couldn't reach them yet. Radio communications went silent. The 250,000 Filipino and American troops in the Philippines were on their own. Bell was 45 years old in 1941. Born to Kansas farmers, he had spent his youth ploughing fields and dreaming of something beyond the horizon. That something arrived in the form of Presbyterian missionaries who spoke at his small church about teaching in foreign lands. He had arrived in the Philippines in 1921, fresh from Emporia College in Kansas, carrying a physics degree and a calling to missionary work. Silliman University, founded by Presbyterians in 1901, needed science professors. The pay was minimal, Hampton $200 annually. The conditions were challenging: tropical heat, monsoons, diseases. The reward was purpose. For 20 years, he had been the quiet American professor. He taught thermodynamics to children of sugar plantation workers. He explained Newton's laws to fishermen's sons. He conducted electricity experiments with equipment he built from scrap metal. He led Sunday services in Cebuano, the local language he had learned phonetically, word by word, year by year. His students loved him because he never condescended. He learned their language instead of demanding they perfect his. He attended their weddings, their funerals, their baptisms. He knew their families by name. The Filipino faculty trusted him because he treated them as equals. In colonial Philippines, where American superiority was often assumed and enforced, Bell's humility was revolutionary. The community considered him one of their own, not an American occupier, not a temporary visitor, one of them. This trust, built over 2 decades of patience, of learning names, of attending weddings and funerals, of never demanding, never assuming, never condescending, would become the foundation of something the Japanese could never counter. An army that wasn't really an army. A resistance built not on military hierarchy, but on respect earned one relationship at a time. When the Japanese landed at Dumaguete, the coastal capital of Negros Oriental, on May 26, 1942, they expected submission. Their intelligence reports indicated minimal military presence on Negros. A few scattered Philippine army units, some local constabulary police, no American combat troops. What they found instead was an empty city. The Americans had evacuated into the mountains. The Filipinos had melted into the countryside. The shops were closed. The streets were silent. And Professor Bell had made a decision that would define the next 3 years. He took his family, his wife Edna, their children, into the hills above Silliman University to a remote retreat called Malabo, not to hide permanently, to wait, to watch, to decide. The Japanese occupation doctrine was brutally simple and proven across Asia. Secure the coastal cities, control the ports, extract resources, sugar, coconut, hemp, rice, establish a puppet government to legitimize occupation, punish resistance with overwhelming violence to intimidate the population. On paper, it worked. In Manchuria, in Korea, in occupied China, Japanese occupation had crushed resistance through systematic brutality. In practice, the Philippines was different. 7,000 islands, most covered in jungle, mountains that could hide armies. A population that had been resisting foreign occupiers since Magellan arrived in 1521, Spanish colonialism for 300 years, American colonialism since 1898. The Filipinos knew how to resist. The Japanese had studied history. They hadn't learned from it. Within weeks of the occupation, Bell's former students began climbing the mountain trails to his refuge at Malabo. They came in small groups, moving at night, avoiding Japanese patrols. They brought rifles, American Springfield 30.06s, left behind by retreating USAFFE units. They brought ammunition, scavenged, hidden, rationed carefully. They brought a request. Teodoro, one of Bell's best physics students, spoke first. "Professor, we need your help." Not orders. A request. Bell's first instinct was refusal. He was a physics professor. A missionary committed to spreading the gospel. A man who had spent 20 years teaching non-violence through Christian example. But Teodoro wasn't asking him to fight. He was asking him to think. "We have weapons, Professor, but we don't know how to use them strategically. We have men willing to fight, but we don't know how to organize them without getting everyone killed. We have anger at the Japanese. They burned my uncle's village yesterday, but we don't know how to turn anger into effectiveness. You taught us to solve problems systematically. Treat this as a physics problem. Teach us to think like you think." Bell made a compromise with himself. He would help with food logistics, intelligence gathering, organization and planning. He wouldn't carry a weapon. He would never personally kill. This moral boundary lasted approximately 6 weeks before reality shattered it. The Japanese garrison at Dumaguete numbered 400 soldiers in June 1942. Professional troops, veterans of the China campaigns since 1937, experienced in counterinsurgency operations. They established a security perimeter around the city. They recruited Filipino collaborators called Makapili, masked informants who would identify resistance sympathizers for execution. They issued a proclamation that was posted in every village they controlled. Anyone found supporting guerrillas will be executed immediately. Their families will be executed. Their villages will be burned. Cooperation brings prosperity. Resistance brings death. The Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere offers freedom from American imperialism. Accept Japanese friendship or face Japanese justice. The proclamation had the opposite effect of what the Japanese intended. Filipino civilians, who might have remained neutral and waited for the war to end, decided that neutrality was impossible. The Japanese had made it a binary choice: collaborate or resist. Most chose resistance, because the Japanese misunderstood one fundamental reality. The Americans had promised Philippine independence in 1946. The Commonwealth government already existed. President Manuel Quezon had established autonomous rule. Filipinos weren't fighting for American imperialism. They were fighting to prevent Japanese imperialism from destroying their path to independence. Bell's intelligence gathering evolved rapidly from passive observation to active coordination. His students brought him reports of Japanese patrol patterns, what time they left the garrison, how many soldiers, what routes they took, what weapons they carried, how long they stayed in each village. Bell used his physics knowledge to calculate optimal ambush positions, fields of fire calculated using trigonometry, escape routes planned using topographical analysis, rally points established using geographical features. Meet at the river bend where it forms a 90-degree angle. You can't miss it. He created a primitive radio from scavenged parts, copper wire from destroyed electrical lines, vacuum tubes salvaged from broken equipment at Silliman, a car battery for power, an antenna made from fence wire strung between trees. The radio was crude but functional. It could receive transmissions from other islands. Eventually, it could transmit to them. He established communication with other resistance groups across Negros. Major Salvador Abcede, a Philippine army officer who had escaped the Bataan Death March, was organizing guerrillas in northern Negros. Former ROTC cadets were forming small bands throughout the interior. Sugar plantation workers were creating supply networks. By August 1942, Bell wasn't just advising anymore. He was commanding. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. There was no moment where Bell suddenly became a military leader. Instead, there was a series of small decisions, each one pulling him deeper into the resistance. A student asked, "Where should we attack, Professor?" Bell calculated fields of fire using the same physics equations he'd taught 1,000 times in his classroom. Angle of approach, line of sight, maximum effective range of a Springfield rifle, 500 yards. Another asked, "When should we strike?" Bell analyzed Japanese patrol schedules, identifying patterns, predicting vulnerabilities. The patrols left at 600 hours and returned by 1800 hours. They never patrolled at night. Japanese doctrine avoided night operations in unfamiliar terrain. Attack at dusk, disappear into darkness. A third asked, "How do we avoid casualties when they outnumber us?" Bell designed escape routes, fallback positions, rally points. Never engage unless you have 3 escape routes. Never stand and fight unless terrain gives you overwhelming advantage. Hit and disappear. Make them chase you into ambushes. He was applying the same systematic thinking he used to design laboratory experiments. Hypothesis: Japanese patrols follow predictable patterns. Test. Observe patrols for 2 weeks, record data. Analysis. Pattern confirmed. They use the same 3 routes repeatedly. Conclusion. Ambush Route 2 because it passes through a ravine with limited visibility and no alternate paths. By September 1942, the guerrillas of Negros Oriental had evolved from scattered angry students into an organized resistance force. Captain Salvador Abquede, who understood infantry tactics from his Philippine Army training, handled immediate tactical operations. Abquede knew how to position men for an ambush, how to achieve fire superiority despite being outnumbered, how to conduct orderly retreats under fire. Bell handled strategy, logistics, and civil-military coordination, where to attack for maximum strategic effect. How to supply guerrilla bands operating across 500 square miles, how to maintain civilian support without endangering them. The division of labor was practical and effective. Abquede knew how to fight. Bell knew how to think 5 steps ahead and win wars without winning every battle. Together, they became something the Japanese couldn't counter, a guerrilla force that fought smart instead of hard. The Japanese understood conventional warfare. They understood occupation through overwhelming force. They didn't understand what they were facing on Negros. A typical Japanese counterinsurgency operation followed established doctrine developed in China and Korea. Intelligence identifies guerrilla sympathizers in a specific village. Japanese troops surround the village at dawn. 300 soldiers for a village of 200 people. Makapili collaborators, wearing masks to hide their identity, point out suspects. Suspects are interrogated briefly. Suspects are executed on the spot, often by beheading. The village is burned as a warning to other villages. Japanese troops withdraw to their garrison before nightfall. This doctrine worked in China, where fear of Japanese brutality had created submission. It worked in Korea, where organized resistance had been crushed by 1940. It failed spectacularly in the Philippines. The problem was threefold. First, geography. Negros is 13,000 square kilometers of mountainous jungle. Only the coastal areas and river valleys were accessible to mechanized forces. The Japanese controlled perhaps 15% of that territory, the coastal cities, the ports, the major roads connecting them. The other 85% belonged to the guerrillas. Second, population density. China and Korea had large cities that could be occupied and controlled. The Philippines had thousands of small villages scattered across impossible terrain. You couldn't garrison every village. You couldn't even reach every village without walking for days through jungle. Third, motivation. In China and Korea, many civilians wanted the war to end, regardless of who won. In the Philippines, the civilians saw Japanese occupation as temporary. The Americans had promised to return. MacArthur had said, "I shall return." Filipino civilians believed him. They were willing to suffer temporarily for independence later. When the Japanese burned a village, the survivors didn't submit. They walked into the hills and joined Bell's resistance. Their homes were destroyed anyway. What did they have to lose? When the Japanese executed suspected guerrilla sympathizers, they didn't intimidate the population. They created martyrs. They motivated recruits. They proved to every Filipino that the Japanese were enemies, not liberators. By October 1942, Bell's force had grown from 50 students to 300 fighters. By December, 600. By March 1943, over 1,000 organized guerrillas operating across Negros Oriental. The Japanese garrison at Dumaguete remained at 400 soldiers. They couldn't increase it without weakening garrisons elsewhere. The asymmetry was stark. The Japanese had professional soldiers, superior weapons, and fortified positions. The guerrillas had numbers, terrain, and popular support. In conventional warfare, the Japanese would win, but guerrilla warfare isn't conventional. Major Jesus Villamor changed everything when he arrived in January 1943. A Filipino pilot, national hero, one of the few who had engaged Japanese fighters during the initial invasion and survived. He arrived by submarine, USS Tambor, slipping through Japanese naval patrols, surfacing off the coast of Negros at midnight on January 14, 1943. Villamor's mission from MacArthur's headquarters in Australia was straightforward but critical. Assess the guerrilla situation across the Visayas Islands, Negros, Cebu, Panay, Leyte. Establish reliable radio contact with resistance leaders. Determine which guerrilla leaders were competent enough to receive supplies, weapons, and official support. Weed out the incompetent, the opportunistic, and the purely criminal elements masquerading as resistance fighters. Many so-called guerrilla leaders were bandits using the war as cover for robbery. Others were well-intentioned but incompetent, getting their men killed in useless attacks. Some were political opportunists planning to use guerrilla credentials for post-war power. MacArthur's headquarters needed to know who actually deserved support. Villamor was skeptical about Negros from the start. Intelligence reports mentioned scattered resistance, rumors of a Presbyterian missionary coordinating operations. It sounded absurd. Missionaries weren't soldiers. Missionaries prayed. They didn't command guerrilla armies. Then he met Roy Bell. The meeting took place in a mountain camp above Dumaguete on January 18, 1943. Bell arrived at dawn, having walked 12 miles through jungle trails overnight. He wore a threadbare shirt, patched trousers, canvas shoes worn through at the toes. He carried maps he had hand-drawn based on student reconnaissance reports. He spoke perfect Cebuano to the guerrillas guarding the camp. He knew their names, asked about their families. Villamor, accustomed to military formality, was initially unimpressed. This man didn't look like a commander. He looked like a schoolteacher who had been living in the jungle too long. Then Bell opened his mouth and began describing the tactical situation on Negros. He produced a ledger, handwritten in meticulous detail. In it, he had recorded every Japanese patrol for the past 6 months. Dates, times, routes, troop strength, weapons carried, officers commanding, duration of patrol. He had calculated average Japanese response times to guerrilla attacks, 47 minutes from initial contact to arrival of reinforcements. He had mapped Japanese defensive positions with engineering precision, noting fields of fire, blind spots, weaknesses in their perimeter. He had identified vulnerabilities in the Japanese supply chain. They received rice shipments by barge every Tuesday and Thursday. The barges were lightly guarded and could be ambushed. He explained his intelligence network. Former students working as civilian laborers inside Japanese installations. Coast watchers with radios reporting ship movements. Civilian couriers who could move messages across the island in 48 hours. Villamor, a professional military officer educated at West Point through a Philippine Army scholarship, recognized something immediately. This Presbyterian missionary thought like a military strategist, better than most colonels Villamor had served under. More importantly, Bell commanded absolute loyalty from his men, not through fear or military discipline, through trust built over 20 years, one student at a time. When Bell gave an order, men obeyed because they believed he would never waste their lives. When Bell said an attack would work, they trusted his calculations. When Bell said to retreat, they didn't feel shame. They felt grateful he valued their survival. Villamor promoted Bell to major on the spot. The rank was symbolic at first. MacArthur's headquarters in Australia would officially confirm it months later through submarine-delivered orders. but on Negros it meant Bell was now officially part of the US Army forces in the Philippines, Far East. More practically, it meant Bell could now officially request supplies from MacArthur's headquarters: weapons, ammunition, radio equipment, medicine, money to pay informants. Within weeks, another submarine would arrive at Negros, USS Narwhal, carrying 60 tons of supplies specifically requisitioned by Major Roy Bell. The Japanese learned about Bell in February 1943 through the worst possible means: a betrayal. A guerrilla captured during a patrol ambush, wounded and facing execution, broke under interrogation. He revealed the name of the resistance coordinator for Negros Oriental. Professor Bell, American, teacher at Silliman University. He's been here 20 years. Everyone knows him. The Japanese intelligence officer, Captain Nakamura, couldn't believe it. A professor? Not a military officer? A missionary? Not a soldier? The prisoner laughed despite the torture, despite knowing he would die. Professor Bell knows this island better than you ever will. He taught half the people on this island. The other half knows someone he taught. You can't kill him because you can't find him. And even if you find him and kill him, you'll have to kill 1,000 others to stop what he started. He's not just a commander. He's family to these people. The prisoner was beheaded that afternoon in the town square as a public warning. His head was placed on a pike. A sign was attached: "This is the fate of all guerrilla sympathizers." The display had the opposite effect. 300 civilians attended the prisoner's funeral, held secretly in the hills that night. 50 new recruits joined the guerrillas the next day. The Japanese doubled the garrison at Dumaguete to 800 soldiers. They offered a reward, 10,000 pesos initially, later increased to 25,000 pesos, a fortune in occupied Philippines, for information leading to Bell's capture. Dead or alive. No one betrayed him. The reward actually strengthened Bell's position in an unexpected way. Filipino civilians saw the bounty as confirmation that the Japanese feared him. If the Japanese were willing to pay a fortune to capture one Presbyterian missionary, perhaps the resistance actually had a chance. Perhaps the Japanese weren't as invincible as they appeared. Perhaps MacArthur really would return. Students who had been reluctant to join the resistance, fearing Japanese reprisals, decided that if Professor Bell was brave enough to fight, they could be brave enough to join him. Recruitment increased dramatically. By April 1943, Bell's guerrillas numbered 1,500 fighters across Negros Oriental. The Japanese made a critical strategic error in March 1943, born of frustration and misunderstanding guerrilla warfare. They decided to force a confrontation on their terms. They challenged the guerrillas to open battle. A Japanese colonel, Tanaka, issued a proclamation posted in every village they controlled. "The guerrillas are cowards who ambush patrols and run into the jungle like frightened children. If they are truly soldiers, let them face us in open combat like men. We will meet them in the field at Dumaguete on March 25, 1943. We will destroy them in one day. If they refuse, they prove they are bandits, not warriors." Bell read the proclamation and smiled for the first time in weeks. It was the most tactically stupid thing the Japanese could have done. They had just revealed they didn't understand asymmetric warfare at all. The proclamation was designed to shame the guerrillas into a set-piece battle the Japanese would win through superior firepower and training. 800 professional soldiers against 1,500 guerrillas. In open terrain, where Japanese discipline and machine guns would dominate, the guerrillas would be slaughtered. Bell had absolutely no intention of fighting the Japanese on their terms. He had every intention of making them fight on his terms. He sent a response through civilian couriers posted in the same villages. "We accept your challenge, but not at Dumaguete. We will meet you where warriors have always met, in the field, everywhere, anywhere, always on our terms. You control the roads. We control everything else. You have 800 soldiers in Dumaguete. We have 1,500 friends across this island. Let us see who tires first. Over the next 3 months, Bell's guerrillas conducted a campaign that broke the Japanese garrison psychologically. They never fought the Japanese in open combat. Instead, they made the Japanese afraid to leave their garrison. Every patrol that left Dumaguete was ambushed, not destroyed. That would have required a set battle with heavy casualties Bell couldn't afford. Instead, hit by sniper fire from 400 yards. 2 shots. 1 Japanese soldier killed, 1 wounded. Then the guerrillas vanished into jungle before Japanese reinforcements could arrive. This happened every single day for 90 consecutive days. March 26th, patrol of 30 soldiers ambushed on the Sibulan Road. 1 killed, 2 wounded. March 27th, patrol of 20 soldiers ambushed near Bacon, 1 killed. March 28th, patrol of 40 soldiers ambushed at Valencia, 2 killed, 1 wounded. The Japanese couldn't advance because advancing meant more ambushes. They couldn't retreat because retreat would admit defeat. They couldn't hold position without suffering daily casualties. Every patrol became a test of nerve. Every soldier chosen for patrol duty wondered if today was the day he would die. Japanese soldiers began refusing patrol duty. Officers had to implement a lottery system to determine which squad would patrol. No one wanted to draw the short straw. Morale collapsed faster than casualties could explain. A captured Japanese diary found on Lieutenant Sato's body after he was killed in a June 1943 ambush revealed the psychological deterioration. May 17, 1943, lost Private Tanaka today, shot from the trees by an invisible enemy. We fired 200 rounds into the jungle and hit nothing. We never saw the shooter. We never heard him after the shots. He killed my friend and disappeared like smoke. May 22, lost Corporal Yoshida and Private Nakano. They were at the rear of our patrol. We heard shots. When we turned around, both were on the ground bleeding. The guerrillas were already gone. How do you fight an enemy you never see? May 28, I no longer sleep properly. Every sound at night is a guerrilla in my imagination. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every Filipino civilian could be an informant. We are not winning. We are slowly dying. May 30. Sergeant Kimura told me privately that he thinks we will all die on this island. We cannot win against ghosts. The guerrillas are everywhere and nowhere. I think he is right. I think we will all die here. Lieutenant Sato died on June 3, 1943, shot in the head by a sniper. The sniper fired from 450 yards, extraordinary accuracy. Japanese reinforcements arrived 3 minutes later, found Sato's body, found no guerrillas. The sniper was Teodoro, Bell's former physics student, using a captured Japanese Arizaka rifle. Bell had taught him to calculate bullet drop over distance, how wind affects trajectory, how to estimate range using triangulation, physics applied to warfare. The Japanese weren't fighting ghosts. They were fighting a Presbyterian missionary who had spent 20 years teaching systematic problem-solving, who understood that asymmetric warfare wasn't about winning battles. It was about making the enemy too exhausted, too demoralized, too afraid to continue. By August 1943, the Japanese garrison at Dumaguete was combat ineffective despite having 800 soldiers. They rarely patrolled more than 3 miles from the garrison. Supply convoys required 200 soldier escorts for 10-mile journeys. Individual Japanese soldiers caught outside the garrison walls disappeared and were never found. Bell's intelligence network had grown so sophisticated that he knew what the Japanese were planning before they executed it. Civilian workers inside the Japanese garrison passed information. Filipino translators working for the Japanese were actually Bell's agents. Even some Makapili collaborators were double agents, feeding the Japanese false information while reporting to Bell. MacArthur's headquarters in Australia received regular intelligence reports from Major Bell via submarine-delivered courier bags, Japanese troop movements, ship schedules, defensive positions, morale assessments. The intelligence was so detailed that MacArthur's staff used Bell's reports to plan future operations throughout the Visayas. On September 15, 1943, the submarine USS Narwhal surfaced off Negros, carrying 60 tons of supplies for Bell's guerrillas: weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, radio equipment, money for paying informants. It also carried new orders from MacArthur's headquarters. Major Bell was to evacuate. The Japanese had identified him by name. The bounty on his head had increased to 25,000 pesos. Intelligence indicated the Japanese were planning a major operation specifically targeting him. MacArthur's headquarters assessed Bell as too valuable to risk capture or death. Bell refused the evacuation order. He sent a message back via the submarine's radio. "The work here is not finished. The guerrillas have momentum, but still require leadership and coordination. I will not abandon them while they continue to fight. Respectfully request permission to remain on Negros until Japanese are defeated or until I am captured. Major Bell." MacArthur's headquarters responded with a direct order, more forceful, less diplomatic. "Major Bell will evacuate Negros immediately or face court-martial for insubordination. The guerrilla organization you have built will continue without you. Your knowledge of Japanese operations is too valuable to risk. This is not a request." General MacArthur. Bell's response was characteristically Presbyterian in its politeness and stubbornness. "I understand the order and the consequences of refusal. However, I cannot, in good conscience, abandon these people who trusted me for 20 years. They fight because I asked them to organize. They die because I planned the operations. I will face court-martial if necessary. But I will not leave until the Japanese are driven from this island or until I'm captured. These people trusted me as a teacher. I will not betray that trust as a commander. Respectfully, Major Henry Roy Bell." MacArthur's headquarters backed down. They couldn't court-martial a man whose guerrillas were killing Japanese soldiers every day and providing the best intelligence in the Philippines. They sent a terse acknowledgement. "Major Bell's request to remain on Negros is approved. Recommend extreme caution. Do not allow yourself to be captured. The Japanese will torture you for intelligence. MacArthur sends his regards and says you are either the bravest man or the most stubborn man he has never met." The Japanese launched their largest operation against Bell's guerrillas in November 1943. They called it Operation Bamboo Spear. 2,000 Japanese soldiers, 1/5 of their entire garrison strength on Negros, a coordinated sweep through the mountains of Negros Oriental over 17 days. Their objective was singular and simple: find Professor Bell, kill him, destroy his command structure, break the resistance before American reinforcements could arrive. The Japanese commander, Colonel Tanaka, had studied Bell's tactics for 6 months. He understood Bell used mobility and multiple command posts, so Tanaka planned a net, not a spear thrust. Soldiers would advance from 3 directions simultaneously, compressing the guerrillas into a kill zone. No escape routes, no room to maneuver. Overwhelming force applied everywhere at once. Operation Bamboo Spear launched on November 3, 1943. 2,000 Japanese soldiers advanced into the mountains in 3 columns. They had reliable intelligence about guerrilla camp locations provided by captured guerrillas under torture They moved with unprecedented speed and coordination. The first 3 days were successful beyond Japanese expectations. They captured 2 guerrilla camps. They killed 43 guerrillas in firefights. They burned 12 villages suspected of providing food to the resistance. They captured significant supplies: rice, ammunition, medical equipment. They never found Bell, because Bell had done something the Japanese didn't anticipate despite all their planning. He had established not 1 headquarters, not 2, but 7 separate command posts across Negros Oriental. Each was mobile, nothing permanent, just campsites that could be abandoned in 20 minutes. Each had its own radio operator maintaining contact with other posts. Each had escape routes planned in 3 directions. When the Japanese attacked one position using intelligence from captured guerrillas, Bell was already at a different position 30 miles away. The intelligence was accurate, but by the time the Japanese acted on it, Bell had moved. He used the same principles he taught in his physics classroom. Dispersion reduces concentrated vulnerability. Mobility prevents encirclement. Redundancy ensures survival. Information flows across a network, not through a single point. The Japanese couldn't capture him because they were looking for a headquarters. Bell didn't have a headquarters. He had a distributed command network. By November 13th, the Japanese operation had stalled. They had captured some camps, killed some guerrillas, destroyed some supplies. But Bell's command structure was intact. Attacks on Japanese patrols continued daily. The guerrillas had simply scattered, avoiding the Japanese sweep, waiting for it to end. The Japanese lost 127 soldiers during Operation Bamboo Spear, not in pitched battles, in ambushes conducted while they were searching for guerrillas, in booby traps, sharpened bamboo stakes in concealed pits, in sniper attacks from 500 yards while they were resting. The guerrillas traded space for time. They gave up temporary camp locations. They preserved their fighting force. They waited for the Japanese to exhaust themselves. On November 20th, the Japanese withdrew to Dumaguete, exhausted, demoralized, and no closer to capturing Bell than when they started. Operation Bamboo Spear had failed completely. By December 1943, the tactical situation on Negros had become untenable for the Japanese. They controlled exactly 3 locations: Dumaguete, Bais, Manjuyod, all coastal cities. The guerrillas controlled everything else. Japanese patrols rarely ventured more than 5 miles from their garrisons. Supply convoys between cities required battalion-strength escorts, 200 soldiers to move 1 truck of rice. The sugar production, that was the entire reason for occupying Negros, had dropped to 20% of pre-war levels because guerrillas controlled the countryside where sugarcane grew. A Japanese intelligence assessment from January 1944, captured after the war in Tokyo archives, revealed their desperation. The resistance on Negros is unlike any other occupied territory. The guerrillas are organized, disciplined, and professionally led. They have reliable intelligence networks that penetrate our installations. They have secure supply lines from American submarines. They have popular support from virtually the entire civilian population. The coordinator of this resistance is an American missionary named Henry Roy Bell. He has lived on this island for over 20 years. He is more trusted by the local population than our own occupation government. He speaks their language. He knows their culture. He has taught their children. We cannot defeat him militarily without committing forces we do not have. We cannot win their loyalty because Bell has already won it over 20 years. We recommend evacuation of all Japanese personnel from Negros interior and concentration of forces in coastal strongpoints only until reinforcements can be allocated from other theatres. The recommendation was rejected by Tokyo. The Philippines were designated the final defensive line against American advance toward Japan. Every island had to be held. Every position had to be defended. Retreat was not acceptable. So the Japanese stayed on Negros and continued dying daily. The psychological evolution of the Japanese garrison followed a predictable pattern documented in captured letters and diaries. June 1942. Confidence. We have defeated the Americans. The Philippines are ours. Occupation duty will be easy. These people will learn to accept Japanese leadership. December 1942. Confusion. The guerrillas attack us daily, but we never see them. How can we fight an enemy who refuses to face us? Our patrols return with casualties, but no victories. June 1943. Frustration. Every day we lose men. Every patrol is an ambush. The Filipinos smile at us in the city, but kill us in the countryside. We cannot tell friend from enemy. Nothing makes sense here. December 1943. Fear. I do not want to go on patrol. Last week, 5 men didn't come back. The week before, 7. We find their bodies sometimes. Sometimes we don't. I am afraid every day. This island will kill all of us eventually. A letter found on Private Hiroshi Yamamoto's body in February 1944 captured the complete psychological collapse. Dear Mother, I know you received official notification that I died honorably in combat. I want you to know the truth. We are not dying honorably. We are dying slowly, 1 or 2 at a time, every day, for 2 years. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an entire island. Every tree might hide a sniper. Every Filipino might be a spy. Every step outside our garrison might be our last. Our commander tells us we are winning. But we count the bodies of our friends every week and wonder what victory looks like. There is an American missionary, they say, who organizes all this. His name is Professor Bell. I do not believe in God, but if this man can make professional Japanese soldiers afraid to leave their garrison, perhaps there is something holy in warfare after all. Or perhaps he is simply smarter than we are. I do not think I will survive this war. If you receive this letter, I am already dead. Tell Father I tried to serve with honor, but this island has no honor, only death. Your son, Hiroshi. Private Yamamoto was 19 years old when he wrote that letter. He died 2 days later, shot by a guerrilla sniper while on patrol. The sniper was never found. The letter was found in his pocket by American forces in 1945 and translated. By January 1944, Bell knew several things with certainty. The Japanese were breaking psychologically, but becoming more dangerous. Desperate enemies commit atrocities. His family was at risk. His continued presence endangered the civilians protecting him. The Japanese began systematic reprisals in January 1944 against villages suspected of aiding guerrillas. The village of Malabo, where Bell's family had been sheltering, was surrounded at dawn on January 15th. Japanese troops gave civilians 1 hour to evacuate. Then they burned every structure. 153 buildings destroyed. The village ceased to exist. The Japanese believed Bell's family had been there. They were wrong. Bell's intelligence network had warned him 2 days earlier. He had evacuated his family to a more remote location. But the message from the Japanese was clear. They were willing to destroy everything to capture him. MacArthur's headquarters sent final evacuation orders on January 20th, 1944. No more requests. No more arguments. A direct command. Major Bell will evacuate Negros immediately. This is not negotiable. Your family is at risk. Your continued presence endangers civilians. The submarine USS Narwhal will rendezvous off the coast on February 6, 1944, at 2300 hours. Major Bell, his family, and 18 other high-value American civilians will board. The guerrilla organization you built is strong enough to continue without you. Failure to evacuate will be considered desertion. General MacArthur has personally ordered your evacuation. Do not make him regret giving you command. Signed, Colonel Whitney, Philippine Regional Section. This time Bell agreed without argument, not because he feared court-martial or charges of desertion, because the Japanese had proven they would kill his family to get to him, because they would kill every civilian who helped him, because he couldn't ask them to die for him anymore, and because after 2 years of building, his work was sustainable without him. The guerrilla organization had competent commanders. Captain Abkede could handle tactical operations. The intelligence networks were established and functioning. The supply lines from submarines were reliable. The civilian support network was unshakable. Professor Bell had built something that would outlast him. Now he had to leave before the Japanese captured him and destroyed it through torture and intelligence extraction. The evacuation was executed with the precision Bell had taught his guerrillas. February 6, 1944, required moving 22 American civilians, professors, missionaries, plantation managers, from various mountain camps to the coast without Japanese detection. 60 miles of trail through Japanese-controlled territory. They moved at night in small groups. Guerrillas controlled every trail. They established checkpoints every mile to guide evacuees and watch for Japanese patrols. They created diversionary attacks to pull Japanese attention away from the evacuation route. At 2300 hours, the USS Narwhal surfaced 3 miles off the coast. In complete darkness, using outrigger canoes muffled with cloth to silent the oars, guerrillas ferried the American civilians to the submarine. 7 trips, 3 civilians per trip, 40 minutes total exposure on the surface. Roy Bell was the last to board. Before stepping into the canoe, he turned back toward the island one final time. In the darkness, he could barely see the mountain silhouette where Silliman University stood. For 20 years, that had been his home, his purpose, his life. For 3 years, it had been his battlefield. He thought of Teodoro, who had become a sniper, of Absede, who would continue commanding, of the 1/500 guerrillas who had trusted a physics professor to teach them war, of the 200 Japanese soldiers they had killed, of the 156 guerrillas who had died under his command. He whispered a prayer in Cebuano. "May God protect you. I will remember you, all of you." Then he stepped into the canoe. At 2307 hours, the submarine dove. 3 minutes later, they were 100 feet underwater, heading south toward Australia at 12 knots. Professor Bell was safe, but the guerrillas he had trained continued fighting with the tactics he had taught them. And the Japanese continued dying daily according to the patterns he had calculated. When MacArthur returned to the Philippines in October 1944, landing at Leyte with 200,000 troops, his intelligence staff provided comprehensive briefings on every island. For Negros, the briefing was extraordinary. Organized guerrilla forces numbered 3,500 fighters. They controlled all interior territory, about 11,000 of Negros' 13,000 square kilometers. They had detailed intelligence on every Japanese position, updated weekly. They had marked maps showing strong points, supply routes, defensive preparations, troop strengths. They had infiltrated Japanese installations with civilian workers who reported everything. MacArthur's invasion planning staff used Bell's intelligence to design operations that minimized American casualties. When American forces landed on Negros in March 1945, they knew exactly where every Japanese position was located. They bypassed heavily fortified positions and simply surrounded them. They cut supply lines and starved Japanese garrisons into surrender. They coordinated with Bell's guerrillas, who served as guides, scouts, and combat units. The liberation of Negros took 3 weeks instead of 3 months. American casualties were 380 killed, 1,200 wounded. Japanese casualties were catastrophic, 1,847 killed in combat, 2,200 captured when they ran out of food and ammunition. The survivors retreated into the mountains where Bell's guerrillas hunted them until Japan surrendered in August 1945. The final assessment from MacArthur's headquarters, written in April 1945 after Negros was secured, summarized Bell's impact with clinical precision. Major Henry Roy Bell, Presbyterian missionary and physics professor, organized and coordinated guerrilla resistance on Negros from June 1942 to February 1944. Under his leadership, guerrilla forces denied Japanese control over 90% of the island. Japanese occupation forces were unable to conduct operations outside coastal garrisons. Sugar production dropped 80%, denying resources to Japanese war effort. Major Bell's intelligence networks provided detailed information that enabled American forces to liberate Negros with minimal casualties. Estimated American casualties prevented by Major Bell's guerrilla organization: 4,000, 6,000 soldiers. Japanese casualties inflicted by forces under Major Bell's command: 870 killed or wounded. Major Bell is recommended for the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding service. Bell received the Legion of Merit in November 1945 at a ceremony in Australia. He also received official confirmation of his rank as Major in the U.S. Army Reserves, and a personal letter from General Douglas MacArthur, written in MacArthur's characteristically dramatic style. Major Bell, your service to the United States and the people of the Philippines exemplifies the highest traditions of American valor and exceeds anything I have witnessed in 40 years of military service. You proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of duty. You proved that warfare is not merely violence, but intelligence applied to strategy. The guerrillas you organized and led saved thousands of American lives and hastened the liberation of the Philippines by months. You accomplished what professional soldiers said was impossible. On behalf of a grateful nation and a liberated people, I salute you. Douglas MacArthur, General, United States Army. Roy Bell returned to Negros briefly after the war ended, not as a missionary returning to his post, as a returning hero welcomed by thousands. The Japanese had destroyed Silliman University during their final retreat in March 1945. Every building burned. The laboratories where Bell had taught physics were rubble. The chapel where he had led services was gone. Bell helped organize the reconstruction. He raised funds from American Presbyterian churches. He designed the new physics laboratory himself. He taught one final semester in 1946 before his health failed. 3 years living in the mountains, constant stress, repeated bouts of malaria and dysentery had permanently damaged his body. He was 49 years old, but looked 65. He returned to the United States in 1947. He taught at several American universities, brief appointments, never staying long. He never returned to the Philippines, though he wrote letters to his former students until his death. He died in 1983, age 87, in Silver Spring, Maryland. His obituary in the New York Times was 3 paragraphs. It mentioned his missionary work. It mentioned his teaching career at various American universities. It mentioned briefly his service in World War II as a guerrilla coordinator in the Philippines. The obituary didn't capture what mattered. It didn't mention that for 3 years the Japanese Empire committed thousands of soldiers to hunting one Presbyterian missionary. It didn't mention that students who learned thermodynamics in his classroom learned insurgency in his mountain camps. It didn't mention that his intelligence network was so effective that MacArthur's staff considered him more valuable than most colonels. It didn't mention that he commanded 3,500 fighters who never surrendered, never broke, never stopped believing their physics professor could outwit the Japanese Empire. But the Japanese captured it in a report written in April 1945, after Negros was liberated, and Japanese intelligence officers analyzed their failure. The report was discovered in Tokyo military archives in 1952. We faced an enemy we could not understand. A missionary who became a soldier, a teacher who became a commander, a man of God who became our most effective opponent. We searched for him for 3 years with 2,000 soldiers and 25,000 pesos bounty. We never found him. Not because he was hiding, because the entire island was hiding him. We burned villages. They joined him. We executed civilians. They protected him. We increased our garrison. He increased his army faster. We learned too late that occupying territory is not the same as controlling it. We learned that the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the most weapons, but the one with the most trust. We learned that a physics professor who knows his students' names is more dangerous than a general who only knows tactics. We never expected a priest to lead a guerrilla army. We learned our mistake only after 870 of our soldiers were dead, and we controlled nothing but the coastline. By then it was too late. Major Bell had already won. The report concluded with a single sentence that explained everything. We never expected a missionary to defeat us, but we were never fighting a missionary. We were fighting 20 years of trust, and trust cannot be killed with bullets, 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 killed with bullets.